They told you hard work pays off, but in corporate systems, obedience is the real currency. Every corporation runs on invisible hierarchies of obedience. The illusion of meritocracy keeps people compliant, trading their ambition for comfort. This episode dissects how corporate loyalty is engineered, why most professionals stagnate, and how to play the power game without becoming its pawn. The obedient are rewarded with predictability. The strategic are rewarded with freedom. This is not motivation. This is structural awareness. If you want freedom instead of predictability, you must see the system before you serve it. Subscribe to the Shadow Economics for cinematic financial psychology and modern power analysis. They told you hard work pays off, but in corporate systems, obedience is the real currency. Not intelligence, not creativity, what even results. Obedience. The quiet kind, the kind that doesn't question incentives, the kind that mistakes stability for safety, the kind that keeps systems running smoothly while convincing those inside them that patience will be rewarded. This is the first illusion you must confront. Wealth does not grow where effort is highest. Power does not concentrate where discipline is strongest. It accumulates where perception is controlled, where narratives are shaped, where behavior is guided without force. The wealthy understand this, not because they are more moral or more driven, but because they see the structure beneath the surface. They see that modern hierarchies are not built on productivity. They are built on compliance, disguised as culture. Most people never question this, because obedience is taught early and reinforced often. It is framed as professionalism, as loyalty, as being a team player. You are rewarded for following procedures, respecting titles, trusting the process. You are told that deviation is risk, that questioning is arrogance, that patience is virtue. Over time, obedience becomes identity, and once it becomes identity, it no longer feels imposed, it feels chosen. This is how control becomes invisible. The paradox is unsettling. The more obedient you are, the more predictable you become. The more predictable you become, the easier you are to manage. And the easier you are to manage, the less valuable you are to those who design the system. The system does not reward obedience with power. It rewards obedience with continuation. You are allowed to remain inside, but rarely allowed to ascend beyond the boundaries set for you. People misinterpret this because they confuse reward with compensation. A raise feels like progress. A promotion feels like recognition. But most promotions are not transfers of power. They are reallocations of responsibility. You are given more tasks, more pressure, more accountability, but not more leverage. You become more invested in the system without gaining control over it. This is not accidental. It is architectural. Modern corporations are not democracies of merit. They are carefully balanced ecosystems of perception. They must convince the majority that the system is fair enough to participate in, while ensuring that real control remains concentrated at the top. This requires a delicate psychological balance. Too much transparency, and people see the ceiling. With too little, and they rebel. The illusion of upward mobility keeps the structure stable. This is why loyalty is praised more than insight. Loyalty does not disrupt flow. Loyalty does not question allocation. Loyalty does not redesign the game. Loyalty accepts the rules as given. From the system's perspective, the ideal participant is competent, motivated, and compliant. Intelligent enough to perform, but not detached enough to analyze the structure itself. Most professionals are trained to optimize within the system, not above it. They learn how to improve performance metrics, not how those metrics were chosen. They learn how to please decision makers, not how decision-making power is distributed. They learn how to appear valuable, not how value is actually captured. And this is where perception becomes more important than effort. The wealthy understand that power flows toward those who can shape how others see reality. In corporate environments, perception determines who is trusted, who is promoted, who is protected, and who is replaceable. Two people can produce the same output. The one who controls the narrative around that output becomes indispensable. The other becomes interchangeable. This is not about manipulation in the crude sense. It is about framing, about context, about timing, about visibility, about knowing which actions are seen and which are merely absorbed. Hard work that is invisible is treated as background noise. Strategic signaling, even with less effort, is treated as leadership. Most people are uncomfortable with this truth because it contradicts the moral framework they were raised with. They want to believe the system is fair, that contribution is noticed, that effort accumulates like interest. But the modern economy does not reward contribution evenly. It rewards positioning. It rewards proximity to decision-making. It rewards those who can influence direction, not those who merely execute it. Obedience becomes costly when it blinds you to this reality. The cost is not just financial, it is psychological. The obedient internalize the system's expectations. They begin to self-censor. They suppress instincts that might disrupt harmony. They delay ambition in exchange for approval. Over time, they lose the ability to think strategically, because strategy requires distance and obedience demands immersion. The wealthy maintain distance. They do not emotionally attach themselves to roles. They do not confuse loyalty with identity. They understand that organizations are instruments, not families. They respect the system, but they do not belong to it. This detachment allows them to observe patterns others miss, to notice how power actually moves, to see which decisions matter and which are ceremonial. Most people never develop this lens because they are too busy proving their worth. They are trapped in performance mode, always demonstrating value, always responding, always available. This constant responsiveness feels productive, but it is strategically sterile. When you are always reacting, you are never directing. The system rewards this reactivity because it creates dependence. The more you tie your sense of worth to external validation, the easier you are to control. Performance reviews, bonuses, recognition programs, corporate values, all of these are tools of perception management. They keep attention focused inward on behavior rather than outward on structure. And structure is where power lives. Consider how decisions are actually made, not in meetings, but before them. Not in policies, but in incentives. Not in mission statements, but in financial models. The visible layer of corporate life is theater. The invisible layer is allocation, budgets, ownership, data. These determine outcomes long before effort enters the equation. Yet most people are trained to optimize the visible layer. They perfect presentations. They attend workshops. They align with stated values. They speak the language of the organization fluently. But fluency does not equal influence. You can speak the language perfectly and still have no control over the direction of the conversation. The wealthy focus on the invisible layer. They ask different questions. Who owns the asset? Who controls the data? Who sets the incentives? Who benefits if this fails? Who benefits if it succeeds? These questions reveal the real hierarchy, the one not printed on organizational charts. This is why perception is more powerful than productivity. Productivity feeds the system. Perception shapes it. Once you understand this, obedience begins to look different. It is no longer virtue. It is a trade. You exchange autonomy for predictability. You exchange risk for comfort. You exchange potential leverage for immediate security. For many, this trade is rational, but it is rarely acknowledged honestly. The problem is not obedience itself. The problem is unconscious obedience. When you obey without understanding what you are reinforcing, you become an asset without ownership. Your time, your skills, your attention are all monetized by structures you do not control. You are rewarded just enough to remain invested, but never enough to escape dependence. This is why the illusion of meritocracy is so carefully maintained. It keeps people striving within the system instead of questioning it. It channels ambition into sanctioned paths. It transforms potential rivals into loyal operators. The wealthy opt out of this dynamic early, even if they remain inside the system temporarily. They treat roles as positions, not identities. They observe more than they speak. They comply selectively. They invest their effort where it increases leverage, not where it merely sustains appearance. They understand a rule most never articulate. The system does not promote those who see it too clearly. It promotes those who protect it. This is why true strategists move quietly. They do not announce their ambitions. They do not challenge authority directly. They do not appear threatening. They build influence laterally, through networks, through knowledge asymmetry, through control of resources others rely on. By the time their power is visible, it is already established. Hard work alone cannot produce this outcome. In fact, excessive visibility of effort often undermines it. The harder you appear to work, the more you signal replaceability. The system values effort it can replicate. It values perception it cannot. This is the core misunderstanding that keeps most people stuck. They believe effort creates power. In reality, effort is consumed by power. Power is built through architecture, through positioning yourself at points of dependency, through becoming difficult to replace, not because you work harder, but because you understand more. Obedience has a price. It is paid slowly, over years, in missed leverage and deferred autonomy. It feels harmless at first, responsible even. But over time, the cost compounds. Not just financially, but strategically. You wake up one day realizing you have mastered execution, but never learned control. The wealthy avoid this fate not by rebelling, but by reframing. They see obedience as a temporary tactic, not a lifelong posture. They comply when it serves them, disengage when it doesn't, and never confuse permission with power. This is where the shift begins. Not in quitting jobs or rejecting systems, but in changing how you relate to them. In learning to see beyond the visible hierarchy into the real one beneath it. And understanding that in modern economies, those who shape perception shape reality. And once you see that clearly, hard work stops being your strategy. It becomes a tool, used selectively, directed intentionally, never worshipped. Because the wealthy are not allergic to effort, they're allergic to wasted effort. Effort that builds someone else's leverage while eroding their own. Effort that reinforces a structure they do not control. Effort offered in exchange for promises instead of positions. They understand something simple and unsettling. The obedient are rewarded with predictability. The strategic are rewarded with freedom. Once you understand that obedience has a cost, the next realization is even more destabilizing. The system does not merely reward compliance. It studies it. It refines it. It engineers environments where obedience feels rational, even desirable. The wealthy do not sit above this system by accident. They position themselves where obedience flows toward them, while perception shields them from scrutiny. This is the true architecture of modern power. Corporations do not extract value primarily through force or authority. They extract it through consent, through incentives that align personal survival with institutional success, through narratives that equate loyalty with morality and dissent with risk. When people believe their stability depends on compliance, control no longer needs to be enforced. It becomes self-sustaining. The illusion of meritocracy is the engine that makes this possible. It teaches people to internalize outcomes as personal reflections of effort, rather than structural consequences of position. When someone succeeds, it is framed as proof the system works. When someone stagnates, it is framed as personal failure. This framing protects the structure from interrogation. People compete with each other instead of examining the architecture above them. The wealthy see this clearly. They understand that most hierarchies are not ladders but filters. They sort participants by temperament, not talent. Those who question incentives are quietly sidelined. Those who comply are elevated just enough to remain invested. The system is not designed to identify the most capable. It is designed to preserve stability while extracting maximum output. This is why perception matters more than performance. Performance is measurable. Perception is malleable. Performance can be replaced. Perception, once established, compounds. When someone is perceived as indispensable, strategic, or aligned with leadership, their mistakes are overlooked and their influence expands. When someone is perceived as merely diligent, their output is consumed without consequence. The wealthy cultivate this asymmetry deliberately. They understand that visibility must be controlled. Too little visibility, and you are ignored. Too much, and you are monitored. The optimal position is selective visibility, being known to the right people for the right reasons, while remaining opaque to the system at large. Most people are trained to do the opposite. They are encouraged to be transparent, available, responsive. They document their work obsessively. They volunteer for additional responsibility. They expose their effort in the hope that it will be rewarded. But transparency is not power. Transparency is accessibility, and accessibility invites extraction. Power requires friction. The wealthy introduce friction strategically. They do not make themselves scarce emotionally, but operationally. They control access to their insight, their decision-making, their resources. This forces the system to orient around them. When others depend on your judgment rather than your output, you shift from being a participant to being a reference point. This is the real mechanism behind influence. Influence is not charisma. It is not authority. It is dependency masked as trust. Corporations function the same way externally. They shape consumer behavior not by coercion, but by framing choices. They do not force loyalty. They manufacture preference. They do not demand obedience. They reward predictability. The same psychological logic governs internal hierarchies. Those who understand it rise without appearing to climb. The obedient professional believes the system will eventually notice their consistency. The strategist understands that systems notice patterns, not intentions. If your pattern is compliance, you are categorized accordingly. If your pattern is strategic ambiguity, sometimes compliant, sometimes withdrawn, always controlled, you become difficult to model. And what cannot be modeled cannot be easily replaced. This is why the wealthy invest heavily in perception management. Reputation, narrative, positioning. These are assets. They shape how others interpret your actions before facts are even considered. In corporate environments, perception precedes reality. Once a narrative solidifies, Evidence is filtered through it. Most people wait for results to speak for them. By then, the narrative has already been written by someone else. The post-Stoic reframing required here is ruthless but liberating. You must detach from the need to be seen as good, loyal, or deserving. These are moral categories, not strategic ones. The system does not reward morality. It rewards alignment. If your behavior aligns with its needs, you are retained. If your thinking threatens its equilibrium, you are neutralized, not aggressively, but administratively. The Machiavellian insight is not to resist this, but to understand it, to recognize that power is rarely announced. It is embedded. It hides in processes, norms, and expectations. Those who master power do not fight the system head-on. They redirect it quietly. They do this by controlling interpretation, by becoming translators between layers of the organization, by understanding incentives better than those who set them, by positioning themselves where information converges and decisions crystallize. This requires patience, silence, emotional restraint. It requires the ability to delay recognition in exchange for leverage. Most people cannot tolerate this delay. They want affirmation now. They want progress to be visible. They want effort to be acknowledged. This impatience is what keeps them obedient. It anchors them to the system's reward cycle. The wealthy step outside that cycle mentally, long before they do physically. They treat the system as a temporary environment, not a permanent identity. They learn its language, exploit its blind spots, and extract what they need without becoming dependent on its validation. This is the quiet rebellion, not loud resistance, but internal disengagement. You stop seeking permission. You stop outsourcing judgment. You stop measuring your worth by metrics designed for control rather than autonomy. The shift is subtle at first. You listen more than you speak. You study incentives instead of personalities. You notice who benefits from each decision, not who announces it. You reduce emotional exposure. You stop volunteering effort that does not increase leverage. You begin to ask a different internal question. Not, how do I advance, but where does power accumulate here? As this perspective stabilizes, something changes. You no longer feel the need to prove yourself. You become selective, calm, strategic. Others sense this shift, even if they cannot name it. You are no longer fully compliant, but not oppositional. You operate at a slight angle to the system, enough to remain inside, but not absorbed by it. This is where perception flips. You are no longer seen as a resource. You are seen as a variable, and variables command attention. The final realization is the quietest, but the most permanent. Freedom is not granted by systems. It is constructed through detachment. The wealthy are not free because they rejected obedience entirely. They are free because they understood its price early and refused to pay it blindly. They chose strategy over comfort, observation over validation, position over performance. Hard work remains part of their lives, but it is no longer worshipped. It is deployed, directed, contained, never offered in exchange for illusion. The system continues to function as it always has. Obedience is still rewarded with predictability. Loyalty is still praised publicly. The illusion remains intact for those who need it. But once you see beyond it, you cannot unsee it. You begin to move differently, speak less, think deeper, act with intention. You stop asking what the system expects of you and start asking what it depends on. That is the moment power shifts. Not because you demanded it, not because you worked harder, but because you stopped mistaking obedience for progress and perception for truth. And in that silence, where effort is no longer your identity and control is no longer visible, you begin to build something most never reach. Not success, not status, but freedom that cannot be revoked.